This is Fox 12 Now.
Hello everyone, this is Fox 12 Now. Thanks for joining us. I'm Greg Nibbler. We are live streaming here out of the Fox 12 Oregon newsroom. We're here every weekday. We start at 1 o'clock. We go throughout the afternoon and we cover a wide range of topics. And I will say, coming up today, we are going to be speaking to the Oregon Department of Fish and Wildlife about the elk populations in the state of Oregon, what to do if you encounter them, and also what to do if you happen to see a sick elk, and is there any concern there? We'll be talking about all of that with them. We're also going to speak to Travel Oregon about their community grant program, which actually provides money and funds to organizations and communities across the state so that they can help increase tourism in their area and build up different programs of their own. They've worked on some really amazing ones so far. We'll hear about those and just how communities can apply for grants as well. Right now, though, we are going to go directly to Washington Governor Bob Ferguson, who is speaking about FEMA.
An additional $827 million above the November forecast. That November forecast, as you know, is the one that I was required by law to utilize for proposing my budget. So in other words, the legislature has hundreds of millions of dollars to work with that I did not, so I'm a little jealous, but it's a good thing that they have that to work with. It's a challenging budget situation, and that will no doubt help solve some of the challenges that we're facing. Number two on that, which was also positive, is the council forecast an additional $1 billion, I think a little more than $1 billion in revenue for the 27-29 biennium. Obviously positive development, and we're hopeful that that trend continues. So looking forward to continuing the work with the legislature to adopt a responsible and balanced budget. FEMA application. So today we're submitting our request to FEMA to declare a major disaster as a result of December's historic flooding and approve our state for the public assistance program. So the FEMA stuff can sometimes get a little confusing, but this is separate than the request we made I'm losing track of time, several weeks ago, a month ago, that was to assist individuals if their home, for example, was impacted by the floods. This is for infrastructure, this particular request. So the deadline for that's tomorrow. We're sending it in today. Part of that is, so we're asking for declaring a major disaster, and number two, to approve our state for a federal program called the Public Assistance Program. That program provides up to 75% reimbursement by the federal government for qualifying repairs to our infrastructure. So that would include the kind of things you'd expect: clearing debris, repairing damage to roads, bridges, public buildings, public utilities, water control facilities, parks, and more. So in terms of damage assessments that we are submitting to FEMA, this historic flooding resulted in, we believe, the largest dollar amount of public infrastructure damage in Washington State in more than 4 decades, and that's counting for inflation. So this is obviously a significant amount of money. The specific preliminary damage assessment that we're submitting is $182.3 million, 182.3. One thing I want to emphasize and underscore is this is a preliminary number. We have to meet a certain deadline for FEMA. So this number will increase as time goes on. This is very normal. So just as one example of many, we still have roads that are under snow, for example, that we still need to assess the total amount. Cost of repairs could increase as time goes on. So that number will change and will undoubtedly go up as time goes on. But the number that we're sending in is $182.3 million. We're also applying today for another FEMA program. This is called the Hazard Mitigation Grant Program. This is an important program that helps fund projects to prepare for future disasters. So, for example, building flood walls, for example. So the damage in many parts of our state, as I've mentioned many times, would have been even worse, significantly worse, without infrastructure to protect against the flooding. So it's just one example in Mount Vernon. We had a media event up there. A flood wall was recently constructed in Mount Vernon just in the last decade. It's clear that flood wall saved downtown from being flooded and saved an awful lot of pain and suffering cost to many Washingtonians. So if approved for that, Washington will qualify for grant funding up to 20% of our total damage assessment. Sorry for a lot of numbers, but in this case, that would be a maximum of $36.6 million. So in other words, 20% of our $182 million, that's what we can seek for that fund that helps us do preventative work going forward. So just wanted to be clear about that. We're also working with the Federal Highway Administration to get funding for repairs to highways in the state. This is a separate process from today's application. So the preliminary damage assessment total does not include, the $182 million does not include damage to federal highways or some of our state highways. So, for example, you're very familiar with Highway 2 and the impacts there and undoubtedly the significant costs there. Our application, the $182 million, does not include Highway 2. So it's confusing on which ones are part of ours and which ones are not. These are just the rules that we're going by. If you have a question about a specific highway and you want to know if it's part of our request or not, just ask Brianna. We can get that answered for you. And what I also mentioned is of the $182 million, the overall request we have, we are eligible for assistance of up to 75% of that number. That's the maximum that we can, if granted, that we can receive. So again, I realize I'm giving you a lot of numbers, but 182 is the request we have. We're eligible for 75% of that. So 25% will fall upon the state and local governments to cover, even if we're granted. I really appreciate the strong bipartisan support for this. I know there's a letter, once again, as there was for the previous request from bipartisan leadership in the state legislature. We have a similar request for a letter from our congressional delegation. They did that last time. I'm optimistic they'll do that again. Business community is writing letters, Association of Cities. There's just a lot of strong support for this. So I feel we're really putting our best foot forward. And I'll be working hard to make sure that we receive the dollars that we desperately need to really address the significant infrastructure needs that we're facing. Today, as you know, is the House of Origin cutoff for the legislature. I'm pleased that we have 6 bills that are agency requests from my office. All 6 have survived and passed their House of Origin, most of those with bipartisan support. So we thank all of our sponsors and prime sponsors, Debbie, of course, in particular, for all the hard work on that. Getting any bill to survive at this stage is a challenge, as you know. So all 6 are alive, so we appreciate that. Those, I won't go through those all in detail. We're happy to get more information for you, but those bills continue our efforts, for example, to speed up and reform our permitting and licensing process, make it easier to build more housing, and protect kids from the dangers of AI chatbots. I will focus the remainder of my time on one piece of legislation, which is getting a lot of attention, of course, the Millionaires Tax. So my team and I are continuing to have productive conversations and discussions with legislative leaders on this proposal and how we can make our state more affordable. And the Senate came out with a good start on how we can utilize the revenue from that Millionaires Tax. As a reminder, we're talking about a tax on incomes over $1 million. I'm probably asked just about every day when I'm out in public, does that count the first $1 million that somebody has in their income? The answer is no. So if you make $1.2 million, if you're fortunate enough to be in that category, you are taxed on $200,000, right? The $200,000 above the $1 million. It does not count the value of your home. Right? A lot of folks have homes that are worth a fair amount of money, just given the housing market, but that value does not count to the $1 million, just so we're clear. So, or your retirement savings. I've said multiple times that any bill I sign must send a significant percentage of the revenue back to Washington families and small business owners. We are not there yet, and we are still not close to being there. This bill must be laser focused on making life more affordable for Washingtonians and continuing to improve areas like K-12 education. Now that we have a Senate proposal, we'll of course soon have a House proposal. So I'm going to lay out in a bit more detail my proposal for how to utilize the revenue from the Millionaires Tax. I'm going to focus, just to be clear, I'm going to focus on the part of the revenue that would go directly back to Washingtonians. Okay, just to be clear of what I'll be focused on. So first, we need to make life more affordable for small business owners. I think there's a front page article in the Seattle Times, I think the Sunday edition, if I recall correctly, that was all about small businesses. I think one nearby to where we are right now that's going through a tough time to make ends meet with additional taxes and costs and things going up. So as I've said before, we need to go much bigger to assist small business owners who help power our economy and create jobs. We should use $1 billion of this new revenue to give small business owners a significant, that's an understatement, tax break. That means dramatically increasing the small business tax credit, which effectively wipes out B&O tax on the first $2.5 million in total revenue for that business. So just to put a number on that, if adopted, that would result in 170,000 small businesses in Washington State no longer paying the B&O tax, zero. Another 30,000 businesses would have their B&O tax reduced. This approach, if adopted, saves these businesses an average of about $5,000 every year. So I appreciate the first step in the Senate proposal to approve a credit up to $300,000 for small businesses. but we need to do more. I also really appreciate Senator Leas's amendment just late yesterday afternoon that eliminates the sales tax on a number of services, which will likely help, well, not likely, it will help businesses, nonprofits, and school districts all across our state. That's rolling back a tax that was adopted last year. Second thing I want to focus on, the Working Families Tax Credit, which I've talked about a fair amount. This is an existing program we have in the state of Washington in which approximately 350,000 low-income families qualify and receive a check, a rebate from the state of Washington for an amount between $300 and $1,300, depending on their income, the size of their family, that type of thing. It's a great program, but it needs to live up to its name of being the Working Families Tax Credit, because right now, far too many working families, they don't qualify for it. So we must dramatically expand both how many working families qualify and the amount of money that they receive. And I need to see both of those things for any bill that I'd be signing. There are simply too many working families who don't qualify. I'll give you a couple examples. A married couple in Bothell raising 2 kids. One's a bus driver, one is a line cook. Assuming they both make typical wages for those professions, they have a take-home pay of about $65,000, and they would not qualify for the Working Families Tax Credit. They would just miss it. Another example, a single parent in Yakima raising 2 kids on their own, working as a custodian. Assuming typical wages, including some overtime every week, they might bring home around $57,000 each year. Once again, that individual with those 2 kids does not currently qualify for a Working Families Tax Credit. I can assure you, those are working families. And there are thousands and thousands and thousands of families just like that all across our state working very hard who do not qualify for this really wonderful program. So here's the way that I look at it. Washington State has what's called a needs standard. A needs standard is a number already set by the state. DSHS establishes this for different programs, and it provides an estimate of what a household needs to maintain a basic standard of living in Washington State. It includes things you would expect: food, clothing, shelter, energy costs, transportation, other necessities. Think of it as a household's living wage. That's a reasonable standard, in my view, to use to figure out who needs some assistance to help make their life a little bit more affordable here in Washington State. So I propose raising eligibility for the Working Families Tax Credit so every Washington family earning at or below that needs standard would qualify. That makes sense to me. Those are our working families, and we need to do this. It will require an investment of $180 million. To me, that is a bargain when we are bringing in a millionaire's tax revenue of over $3 billion. To give you a sense of how many households would be impacted, 460,000 additional households would qualify for assistance from the Working Families Tax Credit if we do this. So we should also increase, by the way, the amount that we send in terms of the rebate. And my proposal increases the amount by 30%. All this combined would make a real difference for those hundreds of thousands of working families all across our state. My total proposed increases, put a dollar amount on this, in the Working Families Tax Credit would include the elimination of the age restriction, which was approved by the Senate, which I really appreciate. So they've done that in their proposal. They eliminated the age restriction in the Working Families Tax Credit. So that, combined with significantly increasing eligibility for nearly 500,000 working family households and increasing the amount of the rebate by 30%, all of that totals $380 million. That's an annual number once this thing is up and running. Our North Star, as I've said before, and I will say it again, is to make life more affordable for more Washingtonians, and this is a key tool in achieving that important goal. As a side note, I just want to be really clear. It's important to clarify what the Senate proposal does on the Working Families Tax Credit. They, of course, eliminated the age restriction, which I support. They also set aside about $300 million each year. What that is that's paying for the existing program. That $300 million is being paid for right now. So they would essentially use the millionaire's tax to backfill that $300 million. That's an okay idea, but that does not count as new dollars back in the pockets of Washingtonians. So I just want to be clear. What I'm proposing is new dollars back in, expanding eligibility. What they have done is simply backfilled existing investments that we're making in that program into the millionaire's tax. We also need more sales tax relief. Sales tax hits Washingtonians hard because it's the same for everybody, regardless of your ability to afford it and pay for it. We all have essentials we need to purchase. So I'm proposing the following. First, let's create a sales tax holiday. 18 states do this already, where for a limited period of time, people can buy certain items without paying any sales tax at all. A sales tax holiday is understood by the public and would apply to all Washingtonians. My proposal includes 2 sales tax holidays, one 3-day weekend, one 2-day holiday. During that time, there'd be no sales tax on items less than $1,000. That would put approximately $141 million back in the pockets of Washingtonians every single year. So, for example, what some states do is they have a weekend holiday before school starts. So parents who need to buy school supplies for their kids, buy clothes for their kids, they can do that and save a lot of money at the same time. I also propose making certain products exempt from the sales tax every day of the year. And I support the Senate proposal to exempt hygiene products. Let's also add the following items. All diapers, and baby products should be exempt from the sales tax. That costs about $200 million every year. In total, adding this all up, my proposal puts, of all the revenue that would come in from the Millionaires Tax, it would put $1.9 billion, a little less than that, but about $1.9 billion directly back in the pockets of Washingtonians. It's over half of the total revenue generated. So all that said, and before I take your questions, I look forward to, of course, working with the Senate, the House, as we arrive at an outcome that works for all of us and get to a place that it's a bill that I can sign. The key word in this whole operation is affordability. That is going to be what guides me. What I'll be looking for in proposals is making life more affordable for Washingtonians and supporting core programs like K-12 education in our state. Anything that's not doing that is something I'll be extremely skeptical of. And so just really appreciate the partnership. We've had a lot of conversations with legislative leaders. The team's had many more, and look forward to more of those conversations as we try and bring this in for a landing in the final weeks of the session. With that, I'm happy to take any questions that folks have.
Governor, if the changes aren't made, would you veto the Millionaires?
Oh, I'm not going to get into a hypothetical. I think I've been pretty clear. I think where I've used the word must, and so I think that's being heard. And look, anything we do around here, you've got to compromise, right? I get that. I think the House gets that. I think the Senate gets that. But I just want to be super clear. I've been clear in private conversations, want to be clear to the public about what I need to see in that to support it. So do I support the concept of Millionaires Tax? You better believe it. Absolutely. But, and this is a significant but, it just can't be $3.5 billion that goes into our general fund. That's not going to work. We know life is too expensive for too many Washingtonians, right? That's a fact. And I hear that every single day when I'm out in public. I hear that from small businesses when I'm out there in public. And we need to be laser focused on making life more affordable for them. So I understand there's lots of competing pressures on how to utilize billions of dollars of revenue. I do. But we need to make a significant investment in that. And I think that's what the people want to see. And it's not just taxing the wealthy, right? It's taking a significant amount of those dollars and helping out folks at the other end of the economic ladder. And that's something I feel very strongly about.
Governor, a lot of concern for folks that are worried that this is going to trickle down, eventually be an income tax on all of us. You've been kind of careful with some of your language to not say that you want that included in the bill that you would sign, that that's not going to be necessary. Would you be willing to state that you don't want this to trickle down beyond a tax on millionaires?
Sorry, I've been careful about what?
Would you be willing to say on the record that
you said I was careful about something. What am I being careful about?
Because when we asked you before, about this trickling down to lower incomes, and I think your response was to say that for now we're just talking about the Millionaires Tax. We're not talking about.
I've been crystal clear on that for anyone who's been listening. So my position is clear that the Millionaires Tax should only apply to folks who make that $1 million. I've also said there needs to be essentially an inflation index, so that amount goes up every single year. So it doesn't essentially folks don't essentially come up to it eventually. So I've been crystal clear on that, that's what I support, and I would not be signing a tax that tax folks below the $1 million. So I've been very clear about that.
Even in the future?
I've been very clear about that, yes, true.
I was going to ask the same question. You took care of that one. Not to get away from the millionaires tax, but there are lots of taxes that are being looked at for this budget, this supplemental budget, increasing the cigarette tax, bottle bill still being discussed. Where do you stand on those issues? How much new revenue do you think needs to be part of this supplemental budget?
Well, we're having conversations. I was pretty clear in my proposal that did not have the benefit of the extra hundreds of millions of dollars that the legislature has, that did not raise those taxes, right? And so what I would say, to the public is, and my team knows this in conversations I have with them about proposals, is I'm pretty laser focused on something increasing cost to Washingtonians. And if so, there better be a pretty damn compelling case for doing that, okay? So I was able to propose a budget that was not easy by any stretch, that had hundreds of millions of dollars less than the legislature has, but it balanced and did not raise taxes. So that gives you a sense of how I'm approaching this and how I'll continue to look at it going forward. Yeah, let's go. We'll move it back and move forward. Yeah.
Governor, whenever the income tax proposal was still in Senate Ways and Means, it attracted a record number of people signing in con. So what does that say to you, and what would your message to Washingtonians with concerns about the proposal be?
Well, I hear concerns of any Washingtonian concerned with any tax increase. So I think what I would say is those of us who support the concept of millionaires tax need to be really, really clear that it applies to less than 0.5% of Washingtonians. Right? And I've not said that today, and I should have said that today, right? Like I should have done that, right? Been crystal clear about that. That is something we need to emphasize so the public understands who this applies to. And to the earlier question, to be also clear, it's $1 million, and it goes up with inflation every single year after that, to be equally clear about that. And to be clear about where the money goes. I don't think the public would support a millionaire's tax if the money simply got deposited in the state general fund without significant dollars going back to the people, right? You know, it's not, again, just about taxing the wealthy. It's about making life more affordable for Washingtonians. So that's part of this process, is to speak publicly about this and be really clear about what it is, who would pay it, who would not pay it, what doesn't count. Your house doesn't count. Your retirement savings don't count. I had a conversation yesterday with someone who thought that the house did apply. And I said, no, it does not. You know, double check with my team afterwards to make sure. So part of that is part of a public conversation. That said, I'm not a big poll guy, you know, but obviously I've seen polling around a millionaire's tax, and, you know, I wouldn't be supporting if I didn't think it would survive at the ballot box. So the people will ultimately have their say on this. That's something else I would say to individuals. They're going to have their say on this. If this passes legislature, if it survives a court challenge, undoubtedly the voters will have their opportunity to weigh in, as they should. I support that. I tend to be a supporter of the initiative process, and this is a big proposal, and I'm glad they'll have a chance to weigh in. So at that time as well, it'll be incumbent on folks like me, if we go forward, to be really clear with the public of who's paying it and who's not. And I think when the public hears that, if we're able to get to a place that I support, I think that they will see a proposal that applies to only a very, very small number of Washingtonians and literally helps millions of Washingtonians all across our state. Yeah.
On the revenue forecast, does that change your calculus or stance on tapping the rainy day fund or tapping the CCA for the working families tax credit, or do you still want to see that?
I guess what I'd say, look, the legislature is working hard right now, so I don't want to, I guess all I would say is, and they've still got hard decisions to make, even with the extra hundreds of millions of dollars that they have. And different folks might reasonably use those dollars in different ways. So, I want to be flexible on that and understand, hey, there were cuts that I made in my budget that if I'd had an extra $600 or $700 million, I probably wouldn't have made. Maybe I would have had taken less out of rainy day reserve fund. I didn't have that situation, so I don't know the answer to that question, but we're working together. We're having those conversations, and I'm confident we'll arrive in a place that balances out all those things. Yeah.
There's at least 3 significant tax rollbacks that are in play right now. There's the Leas amendment you mentioned that would roll back the retail sales tax on services.
Yes.
There was the bill that passed yesterday that would roll back changes to the estate tax.
So I support that.
And then there's also the rollback of the early expiration provision of the P&O surcharge that's embedded in the income tax bill.
And that's like in the first year or two of the millionaires. Yep. And I support that as well, yeah.
Okay, so you said, that was the first part of my question. You support all 3 of those rollbacks?
Yes.
You're talking about spending $2 billion of the roughly $3.5 billion that would come in per year from the income tax. I mean, I guess, do you worry, you came into office at a time of budget stress, do you worry that by rolling back these taxes that lawmakers are talking about rolling back now, you're talking about spending $2 billion of $3.5 billion, that the state ends up on a trajectory where you're still in dicey financial terrain a few years from now?
We talk a lot about that. What I'd say I worry most about is making life more affordable for more Washingtonians. That's what I worry most about. I think we've made a lot of progress in the last year of aligning our budget to reality. We no longer assume the 4.5% revenue growth, but we've talked about before that state law allows the legislature to assume in doing a budget, even though that's not grounded in any reality. We now budget to our actual revenue forecast, and that's going to be the case as long as I'm governor. I feel optimistic about the trends that we're seeing with the latest revenue forecast. That said, there's still challenging issues, but Look, it's a balance. That's why there's a debate going on, right? That's why I don't agree with every legislator, and they don't agree with me on exactly how to balance this. If we've got 50 people in this room, I guarantee you, if you all were to craft how to allocate $3.5 billion, you'd have 50 different proposals. I guarantee it. No two would be exactly alike, for sure. So that's just a part of the process. What I need to do is advocate what I feel strongly about and what I see when I'm out there traveling the state. And, for businesses and for Washingtonians who are struggling right now, we need to meet the moment with this opportunity and make sure that we're putting a significant amount of the revenue back in their pockets. So I hear that concern, and we're talking about that. Yes.
Going back to the FEMA assistance request, do you have an estimate at all for when you might get a response to either of those, either the one you're submitting today or the one you submitted a few weeks ago?
Great question on timing for FEMA. I don't really. And so, if we get some sense of that, of course, we'll let you know. But that's really up to FEMA and the federal government. And look, we understand that, it's a, I don't know how many pages our last two requests are, but they're lengthy documents, they're detailed, there's a lot of data, there's a process. We understand that. So we understand they have a process to go through. And but if we get any information, we'll let you know. Yeah. Yes.
Is there any reason?
All right, we are here in studio at Fox 12 now. That was Governor Bob Ferguson discussing a number of different things. They're taking some questions from the press at the end, but covered a lot just talking about FEMA assistance, and explaining how that works for the state after the flooding that they went through there a couple of months ago. And also talking about the Millionaires Tax. One of the key things I did say there is that the tax wouldn't start until somebody was after their first million. So that first million wouldn't have any kind of an additional tax, but then say you made 1.2, the 200,000 would be. So yeah, a little more details on there, but obviously that's still something that's being worked out and not official yet. But we will have more here for Fox 12 Now. So we're going to continue on with this show. If you're watching on YouTube or Facebook, you'll see this video end. If you're watching on our apps, thanks for doing so. That's one of the great ways to do it. I'd recommend getting that. Coming up, we're going to talk to the Oregon Department of Fish and Wildlife about elk in Oregon. In particular, there's some big herds out there that you may encounter. A lot of people end up doing that. What do you do if that happens? And also, is there any concern about any diseases being passed among the elk? We've seen some people have been reporting that they've encountered some sick elk. So we wanted to just talk about that to the ODFW, just about what they've seen and what you can do if something like that happens. That's coming up next. We need to take a break. We'll talk to you soon. I'm Greg Nibbler. This is Fox 12 Now.